Hi there, good morning and welcome. Thank you for guys for attending our webinar today. We'll be sharing our information, our insights, our learning, and potentially, hopefully, some recommendations into how we can proceed forward with being more inclusive. And I'm on the board of trustees for North East Young Lads and Dads, and I'm also the diversity lead. I've also been on the panel for the Diverse Dads project as an advisor. Now, if I had to take a minute for other members of the team to introduce themselves, and so you can familiarize yourself with the team. Do you want to start off with Adam?
Hey, I'm Adam. I'm one of the peer researchers.
Jack? Unmute yourself, Jack.
Trust me to be the first one. My name's Jack Summerside. I'm from Connected Voice, which is the voluntary sector support organisation for Newcastle and Gateshead, and I was very pleased to be part of the advisory panel.
Kevin?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kevin Studley, and I'm the CEO of North East Young Dads and Lads. Nice to see you all here.
Doug? You're mute, Doug.
Oh, well, sorry. Hi, Doug Laidlaw, North East Young Dads and Lads. I'm the senior project worker and been supporting staff on this project.
Will?
I'm Will, one of the researchers for Diverse Dads.
Dylan?
I'm Dylan and I'm one of the researchers for Diverse Dads.
Owen?
Hi everybody, my name's Owen Thomas. I'm from a charity called Future Men and I've been on the advisory board for a Diverse Dads, and it's been a real pleasure.
Stephen?
Morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Bramwell. I'm here with two hats on. I'm in my day job, I'm an NHS Commissioner for Mental Health and Learning Disability Services, but I'm also chair of the board for North East Young Dads and Lads. Nice to see everyone.
Lindsay, fantastic.
Morning, everyone. I'm a research fellow for the Following Young Fathers Further project.
And Anna.
Morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to see you all here today. My name is Dr. Anna Tarrant, and I'm the director of Following Young Fathers Further. And I think we're just going to pass over to Laura as well.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm another research fellow on the Following Young Fathers Further project.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you there. Obviously, we've got quite a good team here. So, okay, so the overview for today is that we're going to be, basically, we're going to be explaining how we're going to work. Then we're going to be just covering over setting the context for today with the DADS team. And then we're going to be going into groups. Then we're going to have some videos from the young dads regarding what they've been doing and how they've found the process. And then we're going to be going into breakout rooms. Then a plenary, so we have an open floor discussion, have a comfort break. Then we're going to have the insights from the professionals. And a second discussion regarding what we've found out from them, our learnings. Then we're going to have a moment for reflection. And we're going to have our pledges for practice, part where we can plan what we're going to be doing and what we're going to take away and how we're going to implement what we've learned and what we've come up with. Okay, so the next person to speak will be Jack, and he's going to take over the next part of the discussion.
Okay, it has fallen to me just to talk a little bit about the etiquette for today from the Summerside Charm School. And that's one of the elements that we brought to the project, to just some of the technical stuff around running a webinar. It's a sharing and learning event. Now, we're not necessarily going to find definitive answers or key things at the moment, but it's a space for reflection on some of the findings about what kind of services and what support and what shape of things could be to support young diverse dads across the Northeast region and beyond. So you'll have noticed the red buttons flashing in the top left hand corner. Anna is recording this session. That's to help with note taking. Now, you're not going to find yourself as the next Jackie Weaver. We won't be recording the breakout sessions, which will come later on. So the things that will be recorded, the most that will be perhaps appear is a little picture of you is in a square in the corner. But as you'll see, the screen is mostly sharing the slides, but this is just for a record. It's not going to go all over the place. If you have any objections to that, drop it in the chat. If you have problems with that, just let us know. The chat button is at the bottom of your screen. If you move your cursor, that's the pointy thing, the little pointy arrow movie abouty thing, and you'll see there's a chat thing there. There are two ways to use chat. You can either send a message to everyone or to one individual. If you are saying something about what somebody's out,
Jack, we've lost your sound.
my inline thing, I just stuck my elbow on it. So do watch what you're doing with your inline volume control throughout this session. That was a demonstration of what we are going to keep everyone on mute for the moment, just for the bandwidth. Obviously, you'll be able to take yourselves off mute when we go out into the breakout rooms. Could one of my co-hosts admit people while I'm rattling on here? So we do want to hear different perspectives, but that is going to be in the breakout sessions rather than in the main plenary. Cameras, quite a few of you have got your cameras off. If you would like to open your camera up, even though we're across 3 screens, it makes it much more of a human event, and if we can see who you are. And please do react. You know, if speakers are saying something, a nod and a smile from the floor is really, really helpful, and it's some encouragement to the speakers rather than just blank faces or blank screens with your name on. There may be some interruptions and some pauses and some minor technical difficulties, but we're all used to this over the last 11, 12 months, 13 months or so. One thing I will ask is just check that your name on your little photo square actually reflects who you are. That will help with us just recording who's attended. So if it does just say iPhone or it says Samsung Tablet 24, it's really useful for people to know who you are. Now, you can change your name on your own profile. If you go to the top right-hand corner of the photo square, there's 3 buttons. Click on that and there's a rename option. Some of you may not be able to do that, but if you could just pop into the chat if you're not able to do that, to say who you are so other people know who you are and where you're from, that would be really useful. So please do, although we've got asking people to mute all the way through, please do put your thoughts, reflections, comments, questions into the chat. Be aware that the person presenting probably won't be able to follow the chat at the moment, but there are co-hosts dotted around the room who will be able to draw attention to that. To the speakers as appropriate. One thing I will ask is, as you're here, please do try to be present. I know the temptation is to sit there and do your other emails, which I know is why some of you have got your cameras off. I know that. Please do be present at the event. It's a fantastic piece of research, and as I was saying to Anna the other day, it's an absolute exemplar of community engagement research. And even if you weren't interested in the subject matter, which you will be definitely by the end of today, just in terms of the whole process and the enthusiasm and skill of the guys in the community research has just been fantastic to be part of. So I'm going to hand over back to, I think it's to Kev.
Hi, Jack. It's actually to me, and I'm just I'm sharing the screen, so I'm having the odd little problem going forward and back. Just on what Jack said, we are also tweeting from the webinar today using the hashtag #DiverseDads. So please do use that if you are on Twitter. It's a really excellent way just to capture some of the learning from the event and just to really sort of promote what it is that what we're finding and to promote some of the recommendations that we're making today. I'm going to talk very, very briefly and then hand over to the dads because one thing that's been really kind of amazing about this project, particularly from my perspective and something that Jack's already mentioned, is just how involved the young dads have been as part of the community peer research team. So passionate and really on the ball, really pushing us as well as a research team to make sure that this project has been a success and has come out with the outcomes that it has. So a huge thank you just from me, first of all, to the peer research team, to the dads who you will be meeting again very shortly. I'm just going to give a very brief overview now of some of the research that we've been involved in as part of the Following Young Fathers Further team, just to give a little bit of context, if you like, to the Diverse Dads project. So research around young fathers has been relatively limited, and the first major contribution to that research was a project by Emeritus Professor Bren Neal and Carmen Lau Clayton, and they conducted a dedicated study between 2012 and 2015 using qualitative longitudinal methods, where they followed the lives of a cohort of 31 young fathers over time to understand their parenting journeys and also their support needs. That study was also a participatory study, so it involved interaction and engagement with professionals and with services as well, and really built on the lived experience of both young fathers and professionals. A major finding of this study was that it challenged stigmatizing ideas that young fathers are hard to reach, and it did that by listening to their lived experiences. And it also encouraged services to reflect on how they might instead be challenging to access for young men who, many of whom are facing a range of complex challenges, some linked to their fatherhood and some linked to just their position in society and the resources available to them. I then became involved in this study in a rather indirect way. I was doing some research around fatherhoods and poverty and engaged with some of the data that was produced for the Following Young Fathers study. And out of that, we built a funded one-year project called Responding to Young Fathers in a Different Way. And that was all about trying to drive the implementation of inclusive support for young fathers by recognising them as experts by experience. So what we did as part of that project is we brought a model of good practice called the Young Dads Collective and implemented it in Leeds. So that was based originally in London and was very successful there. And we took it up to Leeds to map it onto the existing policy environment. And again, what this did was really demonstrated the value of supporting young fathers to be advocates on behalf of themselves. It's an incredibly powerful model and one that essentially makes the experiences of marginalised young men much more visible. It also addressed a key gap in knowledge around how young fathers from diverse communities experience fathering and service support. So as part of that project, we produced a literature review and a key area a key gap that we identified through that study was that we hear the voices of white working class young men particularly, but we weren't necessarily speaking to or hearing the voices of young men from either Black families or Asian or diverse communities. And that really is where KEV's identification that services themselves weren't reaching diverse constituencies of young fathers really sort of was flagged to me as a really important issue and one to develop and think through through our current study, Following Young Fathers Further. So again, this project's about researching in partnership. We draw on the participatory principles developed and sort of showcased through the original Following Young Fathers study. We then got a little bit of extra funding through the University of Lincoln QR Strategic Fund to develop the Diverse Dads project. And again, this was a really exciting opportunity to do peer research and community-led research. So an additional research methodology that really puts young men and young dads right at the forefront of the research. So a key question posed by Kev and posed by the North East Young Dads and Lads, was how do we understand more about young men's experiences and make services more accessible to those young men, and again in a way that respects difference and diversity as well. And today is the outcome essentially of that research question and of the project. So that's just my little whistle-stop tour. I'm now going to pass over to Adam and we're going to introduce the first video.
Hello, my name is Adam. I'm one of the peer researchers from North East Young Dads and Lads, and I've worked alongside the wonderful young dads, Will and Dylan. It's been a great experience and a great pleasure to have a look into this topic. So what we started off with was simply just mapping out services within the region as to what we can find through kind of secondary research, mainly through internet searches. There was loads of BAME projects, but as we found, not many that kind of supported young dads, which we then went on to looking into getting a questionnaire out to these organisations and finding out some of the reasons for this, which was quite interesting. Some great answers and some great things that we wouldn't have come across just from an internet search. I won't talk too much. The video kind of explains a lot of like kind of what we found with this research. So what I'm going to do is let you all just watch that.
Great, I'm going to try and set this up now, so please do bear with me. Thanks, Adam. Okay. I'm just going to play that. Okay, please can you just, Jack, could you flag if you can hear this for me? I'm just going to press play now. Can you hear that?
I'm Dylan and I'm 21. I became a young dad at 16. I have a daughter who's 4, almost 5 this month. Her name's Connie May. I'm also a peer researcher for North East Young Dads and Lads.
My name's William, I've got 3 kids. I found out I was going to be a dad at 17. I had my second at 19 and my third at 21.
So my name's Adam Gozalancic, like you mentioned. So I'm an appealing support worker for North East Young Dads and Lads, supporting young dads in all types of research. And currently we are doing the Diverse Dads research. What that entails is kind of looking at the support within the North East for dads of different cultures and ethnicities.
I first got involved was just one-to-ones with Kevin because there wasn't a charity then. It was just he was doing some work for a young women's project, and he was meeting a bunch of the young women's partners, and obviously my partner, I gave him my contact details. He met us when I was in school. I think it was like 2015, if I can remember rightly.
Like I say, I like to be actively involved with the young dads. Like I feel if it's anything that can help the young dads, I'm quite happy to do it. So if it's going to help out anything like what we didn't have support-wise when we were going through this sort of stuff, and if we can change that, then yeah.
In regards to ethnicities and the young dads that are coming through the doors, especially through referrals and kind of the group work that we're doing, so the likes of football and beekeeping and all sorts like that. And our CEO, Kevin Stoodley, identified that the diversity of the young dads is very low, and he wanted to look into that and kind of what kind of support do young dads of different cultures receive in the North East. And he got in touch with the Following Young Fathers team, and got talking about it and said actually this would be a really great piece of work to do, and pitched it to me and 2 young dads, and we went from there.
What sort of specific work have you been doing on the project?
Looking at like groups for the BAME community or BAME dads, writing it up about it, finding.
It's not like formal. Like the thing is, it's like it's formal obviously for like when we're going through certain meetings and stuff like that, but it's going to be for the work itself. It's not like it's all formal. Can have like a daft laugh about it, and it makes it just feel more relaxed to do the work really. So
I've enjoyed working with the lads that I work with, working with the full team, and they've been very supportive.
It's been really enjoyable, and kind of there's been a lot of like conversations even with my dad, who we would define as a young dad, but he doesn't define himself as a young dad. So it's kind of even like family discussions as well have been at the forefront of this as well.
We found that there was a lot of support in the bigger cities like Durham, Newcastle and like Gateshead, but there's not a lot of support in like Darlington and stuff like that, and we feel like that there needs to be more support there.
Before, no support groups for like obviously parents like that we couldn't find. So obviously I thought, well, if I look further into obviously the pregnancy rate itself, and we're going off each specific area, so like obviously Hartlepool, Durham and Gateshead, whatever, and we're obviously searching up to find out what the pregnancy rates are of like over the communities really, to see obviously if there is some need for sort of support in that area. We've been in contact with groups, but none of them specifically mention obviously like I work with this dad or this mom, like not many really specifically mention that, so it's basically like a hit and miss sort of thing. So some of them will feel like we're getting lucky and then some we don't.
Another big thing that's came out of this research is we started off with terminology that quite a lot of professionals and researchers might use, which is the term BAME, or Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic. And in actual fact, after having conversations with professionals and no doubt the young dads as well, it will illustrate that that term isn't the greatest term to be using, and actually the best thing to do is, rather than presume, is just to ask how they would like to be identified and go from there.
I just assumed in anyway that a young dad was under 25, because obviously my culture wise, so yeah, all sorts really, mainly just about other cultures and how it affects them parent wise, if you know what I mean. It's different obviously us. One of the cultures I see is when one of the lads interviewed, he was 27, which that's what they considered as a younger parent, but for us it's 25 and that sort of thing.
That kind of initial building of rapport, that there's been so many different people from different backgrounds, and being able to have like a toolkit that you can navigate with around that is really important, and it's one that we've been developing ourselves through these conversations, the even email conversations, and how to pitch this piece of work to be wanted to, like, for people to want to be involved in this.
It made us more aware of like how I word stuff, like don't just assume someone's from somewhere because of like skin colour or like the way like accents and stuff.
We would really recommend people following our YouTube channel as well, where videos will be getting posted, as well as other videos produced by young dads as well, by the Digital Project within North East Young Dads and Lads.
Moving on to the next one.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Adam. I'm going to now move on to the next slide. So we're going to now move on, and I'm going to set this up, and I'm going to invite one of the dads just to introduce the video.
So we will now launch the first of our 2 videos. The video is named after a lovely observation by one of the dads we interviewed who became a dad before the age of 25 and considers himself a young father. We encourage attendees to take notes of what points the dads make and what challenges they face, ready for discussion that we'll have just after the video. Thank you.
Okay, so my name's Chris. I'm part of the Young Dads and Dads board, as well as the DigiDads board as well for this project. And I have one child who is 9, a good age, of course.
I've got 3 little boys myself. Nice. Vincenzo's 9, Luca's 13, and Dean's 21. I was 21 myself when Dean was born, so I was still a boy myself.
My name is Connor Clowes. I've got a 3-year-old son. He's called Jackson. I was 17 when I had him.
That was me sitting with Dean on my knee. I was 21 and that was my little boy sitting on my knee. At 21, and that's when now.
My job is like fun fairs, like I travel, so like I don't really see him, but when I do, like it means everything when I see him. Sometimes like when I go away, I don't see family, so like I do miss my family, but like once like the fairs aren't on, I come back and see like my son. Like it does affect us like sometimes because like I can't see him, but I want him. So it's like I've got to get out there and make money for him really.
I identify as Black British. Being up here, there's not very much diversity. So I think it benefited me starting off when I was younger, obviously down south. So where I was raised around more diverse communities. So for me, I have a strong sense of who I am. So with my son, he's biracial, and for him, he already knows. I think from about 4 or 5, he already knew that he wasn't the same as everyone else. He would say, "Oh, I'm brown." So he knew that, and he said his mom was pink. But I know probably like a year or 2 years time, unfortunately, I'm going to have that conversation with them, which every black parent has with their child, unfortunately, about how if once they start to become more mobile and being out there by themselves, how certain situations, how to handle themselves in certain situations.
The world is very different now to what it was then. My boys are mixed race. I've got 3 little boys myself. They're mixed race, and to be fair, they're the coolest kids in school. With me, every day was torture. So the world's very different now. It's evolved in a good way. But like I say, I grew up in a house full of women, being the only man in the house and never had really had a male role model. Yeah. So as it happened just a few weeks ago, through a friend request on Facebook, I've actually met my dad. And I've met the whole side of the family that I never knew existed.
And what kind of support would you like to see from like professional sort of support, like obviously midwives or young dads or?
Like midwives should like involve the dad a bit more instead of the wife.
I don't feel there's enough information to tell people that there is a support network there. Yeah. I don't think people are aware that there is support there that can help them, because I'll be honest, I certainly wasn't aware that there was help there to support us. Yeah. So I would think that possibly in terms of moving yourself forward, as in a support network, I think you need to put it out there that there is help available.
Yeah.
Because at the minute, like I said, till this, I didn't realise there was support there.
Yeah.
So I would think maybe it's a little bit more advertising to let people know that there is help and there is support there. Young dads will be in education, or they will be in some sort of education environment where, let's face it, had there been a poster on a wall somewhere that they walk past in red, then they would be made aware that there is. Because the sad thing is that through referrals, there's got to be enough of a problem for it to be referred to. So there's actually got to be an issue there before it can be helped, rather than preventing an issue. As a young dad, I mean, if you're struggling, I mean, basically most people's mentality is just to knuckle down, grow up here and push on, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite a...
That's very much it's a man thing. Let's face it, it's a man thing, isn't it? As a man, most men would struggle to admit that they were struggling. I don't think it's so much about location. I think being a dad is what you make of being a dad. I mean, I was a young dad at 21. I was still a boy myself. I was a boy that brought a boy into the world. At 21, I 1000% wasn't ready to be a dad. The difference between when Dean was born, I was still very much Jack the lad. I was out getting into trouble with my mates. We were out causing trouble. I wasn't mature enough to be a dad. Whereas the second time round, when Luca and Vincenzo were born, I was a man that was ready to take responsibilities. I was a man that knew that was what was expected of us as a dad. And one of the things I most respect Dean for is he never once complained that I was better dad to Luca and Vinny than I was to him. He just sort of accepted that I was too young to be a dad. I was too young to face responsibilities. Like I say, I grew up without a dad. I grew up in a house with my mum, with my nana, with my sister. So I didn't really have an example. I didn't have a role model. I didn't have a model to follow. If that makes sense. So to me, I was like, I was slung in the deep end, as in, right, there's your little boy, and it's like, well, hang on, no one showed me how to do this.
When he was first coming, I had all these questions, ideas, thoughts in my head, stuff like that. Because my dad wasn't really in my life. He's always been in and out. So I couldn't really, didn't have any figures that I could go and talk to, family figures. I had an uncle, but he passed away sadly, that was there for his child and everything else, and was a good role model at first. And then I had a granddad as well, but obviously he passed when I was younger as well. So, but those would have been my two like role models to say, oh, this is how being a dad is, and this is how like being a family man is going to be and stuff like that. But I never had that, so I was kind of isolated really. And then I found some like support groups for dads and things, but those were predominantly with older men, like in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and so they weren't in my, I didn't really have much, apart from being a father, I didn't have really much in common with them, so I didn't really understand. They were like much further along down the line, so I didn't really identify much with them because there wasn't any relatability really. It was a bit hard. So it was, but they kind of gave me a bit of insight into how to, like I was saying before, how to handle yourself in certain situations. But there wasn't really anything about identity or anything about how you're going to navigate certain systems or what the court would look like or what certain areas look like or what like nurses, what midwives or whatever. There wasn't any of that. There wasn't really any information regarding how those relationships work, how you got to carry yourself through the system, how many questions can you ask, how involved you can be and stuff like that. There wasn't very much of that, so I kind of had to learn it as I was going along and just try to pick up as much as I can as I was going through the system or going through the process of becoming a dad.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sure that's given you a huge amount of food for thought. I know it certainly has for us as the research team. What we'd now like to do is go into breakout rooms and ask you for your reflections on the points that were made in that video. And then what we'll do is we'll take some notes and we'll feed that back in a plenary. So we've got some questions that we would like you to think through. And I'm going to pop those on the screen in a moment and just share that with you. And what we'll do as well, we'll pop those questions in the chat as well. So just bear with me a sec. So what we'd like you to think through is, what did you learn by listening to the young dads? For you, what are the main things that they discussed in terms of their particular experiences of being young fathers and also being young dads from a diverse background or diverse community? And then what challenges do they describe and have they faced in their parenting journeys? Okay, so I'm going to ask Jack now to pop us into breakout rooms. Thanks, Jack.
Okay, we'll be going, excuse me, we'll be going into breakout rooms for 15 minutes just to bring us back on target. What will happen is I will press the magic button and you will be given the option to go into a breakout room. There shouldn't be anybody left in glorious isolation, but if you find you are, I'll be in one of the breakout rooms, so I may not see you. Pop something in the chat to say help, and I will and I'll sort you out, and they'll be will automatically come back into the main room, and there'll be a 15-second countdown as that ends. There'll be one facilitator in each group, and there will be one note taker in almost all of the groups apart from Anna's, because Anna's multitasking. So we'll see you on the other side. I hope this works.
Okay, hopefully we have everyone back. Well done to Jack for successfully getting us all into breakout rooms. I think that seems to have been successful, so that's fab.
Can I just say apologies to anybody who was left slightly hanging in limbo at the beginning of that? I was multitasking, which as a man, obviously, I cannot do.
Brilliant. So we're now going to just give 1 minute of feedback from each of the group discussions. So if you'll permit me, I'm going to go first, just because I've had to do note taking on my own as well. So we had a range of people from different organisations and different services, and that contributed to a really interesting discussion around some of the kind of pressures that young fathers might experience, and then also kind of some of the issues that professionals need to think through as well. So one of the key points that was raised early on was about the challenges for young fathers of managing the pressures of having a young child as a young person, and then also managing that alongside employment. So she referred to Will's discussion there around the fairground, and that's something that comes out of the academic research really strongly about, you know, the competing pressures sometimes around being there for children, and then also the expectations around being a breadwinner as well. We talked about some of the stigma that young fathers clearly experience, and also that they might fear judgment by professionals, and again that's really important then in terms of ensuring that services are as accessible as possible. To do that, professionals need to be really conscious of and aware of different kind of cultural and religious expectations around parenthood, and try and listen to those and work with them and understand them rather than work with judgment or with fear. And another one around you know, how services get information out there, so thinking through the language, potential language barriers, and also the potential formats that we might use as well. So for like leaflets and flyering, for example, might not be enough. So we started talking a little bit more about what services can do there. Okay, who's next? I'm going to go to Laura, I think.
I'm happy to feedback for room 2. Hi everyone. We had real regional diversity in our breakout room. We covered one corner of England to the other corner of England, from Cornwall up to Gateshead, pretty much. Quite a similar kind of trend of things. So I'll try and sort of summarise it as succinctly as I can. And this was one of the first points we spoke about in reflecting on that diversity in our room of geographical mix. actually one of the things that Chris said in the video was about the identities change when people move around the UK, and it's one of the things which jumped out to us as a kind of group about actually the offer could reflect differently in different parts of the UK, reflecting on the diversity we have in how it's uneven and how that kind of changes. A lot of talk about systems and around the complexity of systems, and this idea that you need to be referred, and the sort of lack of proactive engagement, and that really you're referred when there's a problem or a perceived problem, as opposed to just being referred when there's an opportunity. And I suppose the challenge in that is that engagement of everyone, I think I'm fair to say, but especially young dads, and especially diverse dads, is that they might feel better to engage when they're in a better place, as opposed to being referred to when they're in crisis or any sense of need. Prevention is always better than cure, I think is what we were kind of reflecting on. But really that comes from a sense of, that's where we're getting to, this lack of information out there which allows self-referral or self-engagement, that you're kind of hanging on someone to send you, as opposed to you can gift yourself into that space. There has to be permission given by someone. And I reflect on that in my kind of day job in the NHS quite frequently. But just this real lack of engagement of services, sense that if services don't really ask the questions, that it's not an issue for them and they don't need to really worry about it. So it's almost a little bit of a, dare I say, sweep under the carpet, because if we don't ask, we don't need to worry about it, and this sort of head in the sand approach. And I guess that's really what this research and this challenge is. We're trying to pull people's heads out the sand essentially on this and say, look, this is a real challenge. So I think that's a good summary. I hope I've captured everyone in room 2's comments okay there.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Stephen, and thank you for stepping in for us today as well. He's done this, last minute as well, on off the hoof, so an excellent job. Okay, who was the note taker for Lindsay's group, please?
I did my own notes as well.
There you go. Thanks, Lindsay.
So we talked about the challenges that young dads raised in terms of where to access services, if they even exist, where do we find them? And we flipped that and thought a little bit about, from a professional point of view, how do they make their services more visible? And how do we overcome that challenge of getting young dads into our services? So we had a really good range of professionals talking about their experiences. We had Oliver from Newcastle United Group talking about very targeted work, sort of boots on the ground. Where do we find young men? And maybe like grassroots football communities and things. We also had a little discussion about what kind of spaces young dads want. Should it be men running the groups? Would they be equally comfortable with women? Who should be leading those sorts of community groups? And Will gave us some really good insights from his own experience, where he talked a little bit about how one-to-one support is really useful, at least to begin with. And in terms of finding out about support services, it's often quite localised and word of mouth.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, some really great points there as well. And just to say, we are going to make notes of all of these contributions and distribute those after the webinar as an extra resource as well. Kev, and your note taker.
Yeah, I was working with Dylan, and can I just say what a tour de force the breakout room group was. I mean, the knowledge and experience in that group was just incredible. So yeah, I mean, lots of really fascinating observations and reflections on their own practice too. I think some of the challenges around working within COVID-19, particularly kind of where it comes to involving dads in hospital appointments, was kind of seen as a major challenge at the moment. There is a kind of a conversation about the lack of kind of role models for kind of young fathers. That was kind of really prominent in the videos, and working within what is, a professionally quite a female dominated area. So the need to kind of work with kind of more young dads, and the benefits of working intergenerationally between younger dads and older dads was kind of mentioned, which was really interesting, and something that we've explored previously around men's sheds. So that was fascinating hearing about that. The need to show young dads in a positive light, to be celebratory, and to kind of challenge misconceptions about young dads being feckless, disinterested, and disengaged. And the need to engage young dads at pregnancy or before, so not when the wheels start coming off, not when it enters social care environments, child in need and child protection. So that was a really prominent feature. We also heard from somebody who kind of works with young dads where there's a prominence of kind of gang influence. We've not kind of got that in the same kind of way within our current service beneficiary group, but it was kind of something that was kind of felt that was there, was a challenge. But actually what was talked about was the opportunity, the transformation opportunity to work with young men when they're facing fatherhood, and actually how that gives young men a choice to move away from those negative peer influences and embrace fatherhood and those responsibilities. So yeah, fascinating group of people and some fascinating feedback and comments, so thank you.
Thanks, Kev. I'm now going to move over to Jack.
Okay, that's me giving the feedback. Actually, we had some really interesting conversations, and we kind of covered all the questions in one big hit because there was such a lot of things coming through. I think one of the things we did discuss and people were agreed on was that whole support and what does it look like and what is a referral and why are you referring. For a lot of young men, that was a big issue for them. We also looked at and kind of had a discussion over the different cultural expectations of what age is a young dad. And, a lot of services will say, well, we work with we are under 25s, but culturally, what age does some cultures see a dad as being a young dad? So that is something that could be challenged and looked at as well. And also, which came through a lot was around role models as well, about that role models for dads out there within society as well, but within the want of a better word, as we talked about, the system, whether that's through health or social care, where there isn't a lot of information that's kind of geared and supported towards positive engagement with the young dads. I know a lot of people have talked about that, how sometimes it can be easy not to engage with the young dad because that makes it more work for that person when they're focused on the other part of the family. So really interesting. But a big one, the challenges is how we can make the systems, i.e. health, more dad focused and family focused as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you. I'm now going to Owen Thomas.
So I was the note taker for our group. So one of the biggest things for us, I have to say, was engaging dad during pregnancy and at the antenatal stage. So a lot of services might not engage with young dads, and even through the video, even Chris mentioned the lack of kind of groups as to where a dad and the child can go. And kind of learn the skills that they might have not been given, like during childhood, and kind of the lessons that some men might get. Another thing that kind of came prominent was the media coverage of young dads. So we had a researcher within our group mention how she was doing a thesis on young dads, and out of 57 organisations, only 9 worked with her, and quite a lot, like there was a couple of them kind of gatekeeping and saying we can't do it because of the vulnerable group of young dads that we work with, and the fact that she had to explain, look, the silence and the voice of these young dads to improve the service offer that they might potentially receive or new young dads might receive in the future. And there was also kind of checking in with dad rather than just mum during pregnancy as well. So where's dad? What's dad doing? Does dad need support? Was quite a big thing within our group as well. And the need for advertising of services and kind of letting dads know that there is support out there and there is something for them where they can gain that support, especially like one of the young dads explained, he grew up in a household that was full of women, so he didn't have that role model. One of us as workers could be that role model for that young dad to be the best dad that he can be. And that's more or less kind of the highlights from our group.
Great, thanks, Adam. And what's really great is just to hear sort of similar things that were coming out of the other groups as well, and sort of some of those shared themes. And then we'll just conclude with Chris's group.
Okay, I'm the note taker for Chris. Here goes. Okay, yeah, here goes. We heard that the issues really haven't changed in the last couple of decades, and perhaps you know, that's a reflection in part on austerity setting back you know, development in certainly in the statutory sector in this field. There we go. The point was made that the range of the circumstances and the variety of the barriers that different young dads face is just huge, and therefore, you know, we're talking about a sort of multi-response to their experience. They're very different experiences. We noted that so often it's a lack of role model that is at the heart of the difficulties that some young men are facing. Now here's sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. We heard about the issue that when relationships are really youthful and there is a lack of role model, and then suddenly the immense new pressures of parenting is something that can so very easily trigger domestic problems and domestic violence too, and it needs to be recognized that it's the pressures and not, you know, that's very much part of the picture of that particular problem. There was a lovely affirmation of North East Young Dads and Lads approach in somebody making the point that for so many young men, the real sharing of the deeper issues in their lives comes to light in the context of a shared activity rather than a sit down one-to-one, let's talk about it. You know, let's do something together and then we hear the real story. And that was lovely to hear. I've got a link for us with some research that Samaritans have done in that field. And then, yeah, a really important point, somebody in our group training in midwifery made the point that even currently, there seems to be almost nil input about the experience of fathers in the teaching of midwifery. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of those really, really important and fascinating insights. I'm now going to pass over to Jack.
Okay, we are going to go back into breakout rooms. They're going to be largely the same, but with a few more recent arrivals added into a number of groups.
Okay, so we are now going to move the webinar on to think about professionals. So I'm just going to pass over to Dylan and he's going to introduce the next video.
Our next video shares the insights from professionals working with diverse communities in the Northeast. We encourage you to take note of the key messages from the video for you and what the key learning is for your work practice.
Thanks, Dylan. I'm just going to mute myself.
We've got no audio on the video.
Sorry, everyone. Let me just come out.
Just unshare and enable audio, and then open it up again.
Brilliant, thank you. It was going so well as well. So let me just go back to the start. And pause. And share screen. Here we go, this should work now, hopefully.
So my name's Red. I'm the service manager for youth work at Streetwise Young People's Project. So one of the projects that I do manage is Michael and Shoppy's project, which is the BAME Young Men's work. Streetwise is well known for, it has two strands. So I manage the youth work side, and there's also like a counsel and wellbeing side, like mental health side. And within the mental health team and also within my team, we do engage on my side a bit more on with what you would call BAME. I know it's not a word to use at the moment, or an acronym to use at the moment, but I'm going to use it for the purpose of this until we get a better one.
Yes, so I'm a project worker at Streetwise, and my work is all to do with BAME young men. So that's Black, Asian, minority, ethnic young men. And I run a group called Level Up with another young man called Shafi, and we offer support one-to-one around mental health.
I'm 31 now. I've got a son, Thierry, who's 9. Some years back, well, not some years, a couple of years back now, when I was working really heavily with young fathers, I was working with Young Dads Collective in London, based within the family and childcare trust, on a project that focused on supporting dads and their needs in terms of engagement with services. And what I did there was pretty much help the young dads get their voice really heard and share their experiences with services, and with the aim of improving services to make it more father friendly.
I was working alongside our midwives and health visitors and teenage pregnancy advisors to engage young fathers, you know, up to the age of 25, you know, into support, early years support particularly. Inclusive support, first and foremost, means that dads are brought from being invisible to being made visible, because often, you know, and historically in, you know, supporting our young mums, the dads have not been seen. And we now know to be inclusive, to give best opportunities to young families and to babies and children, is to include both parties, yeah.
So that's why I think the inclusivity is about making sure that you can see other people like yourself. You're more likely to engage. It doesn't have to be tokenistic as well, because I think there's nothing worse than just having someone there for the sake of having someone there. It's about making sure that someone's there who can help and can empower. Do you know anyone who's a policeman? Do you know anyone who's a teacher or a doctor? In the vast majority of the young men we work with, it's no. So it's empower them to go, well, just because you don't see that person, that doesn't mean you can't be that person.
And we don't have enough people from within other communities, so diverse communities, who actually become youth workers or support workers. It's not always about being a victim. So I think sometimes you can, some of the sort of messages that get put out there is Black people are always complaining about racism. Black people are always talking about being a victim or being bullied or being called names, but actually Black people can be doctors, but Black people can be youth workers. Black people can do other things as well, you know.
So if you can look at dad more as a resource, less of as a threat, especially, and I say a threat in particular because when you have young people who have children young, you tend to assume these people don't know what they're doing. It's all new to them. They need to be, the child needs to be protected from them as much as possible. And if you're the dad, it doesn't really help, because you got that stereotype of being a young dad, and that tends to be quite negative.
I think if you're running a dad's group, as an example, depends where you go fishing to catch these young dads. There's more than one pond, river or stream, and sometimes you have to go out of your way to go to different places. There wasn't really that support for those guys, especially when they're young dads and there's the negotiating can they see their child, because they're not necessarily always in a relationship with the person they have a child with.
Ever see any men's groups? You never see any of those things, and I think culturally that's the thing that needs to change. And I would imagine in more diverse communities where some of the stigmas about being a dad and role models and what men should do would be even more difficult to break down.
Go to the places that you wouldn't normally go to and speak to some of the community leaders and let them know that there's these things in place. I think that's really, really important, and that doesn't always happen.
Sometimes you can offer the same service to a wide range of people, but sometimes you can't, and you need to understand what that change needs to look like. Sometimes I speak to dads in other parts of England, for example, Grimsby, Leeds, and just geographically, those dads have a different setup than the dads in London. And I can't really explain it until you engage with them and you understand, oh my God, your geographic design is the town and cities you are in makes engaging with you guys a lot more unique than what it does for London.
Because we were a Newcastle-wide service, and because a lot of our funding was from the local authority, having diversity was part of our sort of like a reach, making sure it was representative of the general population or the demographics of that age group. Hard to reach communities sometimes exist, so we just go out of our way, be assertive in reaching hard to reach communities. So that might be young fathers who don't feel they need the service, or they've got other issues. Make sure that we were responsive and sensitive to different cultural needs, and work in a way that was bespoke to what that might need as well.
It's a lot of hard work. It is a lot of hard work. But you've also got to remember, when you go into churches and mosques, like Michael alluded to there as well, which I've also done, you've got gatekeepers. And in the past, when I was doing the work and I wanted to get in there, it's been my dad who's been my passport in, who said, oh, this is my son, this is the work he's done, give him 5 minutes. And it hasn't always worked, because some of those communities have still shut the doors on me. But a lot of the time, because I've had respect for him, he's given me the passport to get into that organisation or that community group.
What we didn't find is that it was a coherent group. So if you had, say, someone from, say, mixed cultural background, say Afro-British background, they may not have aligned themselves to that kind of classification. They just saw themselves as a young father. Equally, we work with people from Eastern Europe, might have like a Roma background. So Roma communities, whilst they might have some common cultural stuff, they don't see themselves as just like one monolith block. So we thought individualized approach, just seeing the person who they are, but whilst recognizing there might be barriers, but working with that like we would work with anyone who might have barriers, whether that's class, religion, wherever they came from. So it's just like being sensitive. If there's a barrier that you might have, whether that's to do with language or nuances, it's just trying to work through them and seek and get resources if you need them, but don't see them as a barrier that can't be overcome. There's always ways of working through it.
Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. Apologies to my group, I got cut off midstream, even though I could see the time ticking down. We're going to do the same thing. So we're going to go through each of the groups to hear some of the reflections. If you'll permit me, I'll go first again, I think, and then I can focus on who's next. Again, we've had some really, really fascinating discussions among this group. A really great point that came out initially was about the value of establishing a kind of champion in the community, and someone who might be able to support people as parents, but then also in terms of their maybe cultural and religious affiliation. So that might be someone in a church, for example, or a mosque. And that kind of aligns with some of the findings from this study about the importance of working in partnership with different organisations, perhaps with different remits, if you like. There was a really interesting point around opportunity. So obviously services are working in a constrained context, and I think it was Tom talked about austerity in the last session, and again issues around services being potentially a postcode lottery, or having short-term funding, which then might affect and influence longer-term practice. But in terms of referrals, for example, trying to identify chances and opportunities to actually identify young parents is really worth doing. And the example here was about data sharing and with midwifery, for example, and perhaps trying to identify young dads through young mums there. We also heard things about basic things like sending letters to dad as well. So if we find out that dad is there, communicating with him, that's something that I've been hearing for years and years and years, and again a really important an effective change, I think, for bringing dad into the work and recognizing him. One thing that was raised is just how hidden young dads are already. So then again, thinking about questions of diversity, contribute to that even further and make those young men even more invisible. So again, this can create particular issues around making services difficult to access. There's also a really important point about dads featuring in any material around support for babies and infant mental health. I think the point was made that babies are scary, and having two of my own, I completely agree. So when you have a baby as a young person, that can really affect confidence and those kinds of things. So that it's really important that dads feature in that support. And then just a final point was around recognising sort of the passion and insight that professionals really bring to this kind of work. And one thing that's kind of been observed really is that there's a huge amount of skillful, sensitive outreach to mothers, but much less so perhaps for fathers. And we wonder why that might be. Perhaps it's around confidence, but essentially what we'd encourage is that all professionals be curious, both about mum and dad. So that's me. Okay, so we'll now go on to Laura. Or Laura's, it was Stephen, wasn't it?
Yes, I'm the nominated spokesperson for this one. Hi again, everyone. Really interesting conversation again. Just sort of scribbling through my notes. Apologies, this one isn't as neat. I suppose what we talked about was professionals trying to help young men recognise that their experiences from their childhood versus what they want for their own child's experience, and how you kind of build on that and recognise both as separate but unique and combined features. They go together a bit like jigsaw. But also that quote that Norman said about bringing dads from the invisible to the visible is a real kind of professional role. We can't just keep repeating what we always done. There's a phrase I love, which is what got us to where we are won't get us to where we want to be, and we need to think differently to kind of drive us forward. Talked a lot about masculinity issues and detaching role and things like that, but that kind of led us into, sometimes we find, or professionals find, the support that dads want is more material. It's more help at the present moment around specific needs, like supporting with getting equipment or paying bills and stuff like that, but slightly harder to engage when it comes to the kind of parenting offer. So understanding developmental milestones and infant first aid, that sort of stuff. But perhaps dads don't come because of the way things are set up. They're set up to appeal to mum or mother of child, and that kind of space isn't allowed. We talked about the worry of the expert view, that dads kind of are worried that they're going to be tested in some way, and they only know what they only know, and if they're going to be tested, they might look like they don't know what they're doing. But I suppose there's a counter argument for that, was they'll only know what they know if they come to find out that they know it. Essentially becomes a bit of a dichotomy in itself. A lot of talk about community leaders and this idea of needing an introduction. Fred called it a passport, and it's a lovely term. And this idea that you need to go to them in different ways of engagement. And I, in my group, just started to share Dylan as part of Needle's work around the online gaming engagement, and actually that isn't using leaflets or posters, that's using the PlayStation Network and other things to engage with young men in ways that they know how to engage with. And I don't pretend to understand how it works, if I'm honest, but it seems to. And also we spoke about the reflection of diversity of staff, this idea of role models versus visibility, and how the two are very different, and we need to acknowledge that. And Fred's point around the visibility of Black young men, particularly not recognizing themselves as a police officer, a youth worker, or a doctor, actually that becomes a real issue, because when we try to engage, we need that visibility to be present in order to bring through. But if we're not attracting into study in the first place, we're in this real kind of complicated world that we need to crack. But equally within that, we need to reflect on gender balance as well, and that that's an important conversation to have as part of this work.
Great, thank you, Steve. Stephen, I should say. So we'll now go to Lindsay.
Yeah, similar points really, so I'll keep it quite brief. There's some lovely feedback on the videos, which was great. We focused on, again, that idea about inclusive support, meaning bringing dads from the invisible to the visible. We talked a little bit about how reaching out to someone who can champion from the local community to work alongside is a useful tactic. We also talked about sort of being aware of our own positionality and privileges, and thinking about how we sort of work around that. Another point that was mentioned was how Vanessa mentioned how it's sometimes quite hard to reach men, even though they're managing to reach other women from particular communities. And sometimes it's quite hard to attract men into the roles as well, into the worker roles. So we talked about some of the issues that might be, and there was a suggestion that roles could maybe be specifically advertised for men. I'll leave it there.
Brilliant, thanks, Lindsay. And next is Kev.
Thanks, Anna, and hello, everyone. So, I mean, our group kind of spoke about a number of different kind of challenges and opportunities, really. The first challenge identified was that it's about how services perceive work with young dads, and how they kind of sell that, really, and the kind of pitch they give, and the impression that work with young dads is about fixing young men, and helping them to be, fixing their parenting, which one of the services talked about kind of really putting them on the back foot, really, particularly when the referrals are coming, say, from kind of social care related kind of fields, so that they're not getting to do those initial steps and those initial befriending work with those young men. Those young men are coming in on the back of some challenges and difficulties. So it really affects that relationship kind of building that goes on with that. So when I spoke about the challenges of working in Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities where there's a really strong patriarchal kind of family unit, and where young dads often living with maternal and paternal family, and the challenges of supporting dad to become identify himself as being a young man and a young father in his own right, and the challenges about being a dad and a son. Moving on from that, we talked about the challenges that one of the projects kind of raised about how to engage with young dads in a meaningful way. And some of the solutions that were kind of raised were about things like den making and using the wildlife trusts and doing picnics with dads and their children. One of the young dads in our group talked about the importance of being genuine, and the befriending work that has to happen early on in that relationship to kind of really, engage dad and bring him in and involve him in a meaningful way. I think food was mentioned, which has always been one of the kind of key aspects of our work is feeding young dads, because it seems to kind of be a great, it does a lot of things. I think there's something about, young men being involved in cooking and cooking relating stuff, but equally about sharing food and the conversations we have when we've got full tummies. I think on the back of that conversation about how to engage, there was an elephant in the room that was kind of raised. It was just about funding, really. Funding for this work, funding for a lot of the projects we spoke to were kind of VCS. So a lot of the funding was hand to mouth. It was time limited, and there was another double impact of capacity that comes with that. So a lot of the projects were at capacity already. So the ability to invest long-term in supporting young men and developing that relationship, first of all, wasn't there. They had to almost, they were very reactive. And we've seen a lot of really great projects disappear and the knowledge disappear because the funding ends. So yeah, a kind of major challenge there, I think, in terms of how we invest in this work and how we sustain this work long term. Thanks, guys.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Kev. I'm just conscious of time, so we'll go to Doug next, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll be nice and quick. It was quite interesting because we, in our group, we more or less cover the 4 corners of the UK, so very different areas working in. But one of the big things that came through when we were looking at, what are the challenges and what we could do was a lot around about there needs to be a lot more partnership work, and that comes from other agencies, not the ones engaging with fathers, because they're really keen to be part of that process, but sometimes find it hard to break into that process. I think one of the things that came through as well, I think it was that Fred was saying it, so fishing in the right pond. Where are you working? How are you working? And why do you want to work with this group? And also, I think one came around the geographical restrictions. Again, sometimes with funding, but sometimes the area that you're working in, and though sometimes these community identity and using the resources that are in the community to support the work that you're trying to do came through a lot as well. That's something that could be worked on to support those communities, to identify those young dads that may need service support. Thanks.
Brilliant. Yes, thanks, Doug. And to Adam, please.
So our group kind of talked mainly about even like early stages of like paperwork. So having mandatory questions on staff's paperwork, asking about dad. And if you don't include dad, asking the question as to why you're not including dad. So another thing that came through was the kind of surprise that midwiferys and the health visitors don't ask about dad, and kind of changing that as well, and including like it is a family unit, so including both sides of the family, and the importance of including the other side of the family and what kind of impact that will have on the child's life as well. And there was also talks about the importance of including dads in the early stages, and one thing that came through was about dads who then become the sole carer of the children, and getting put under a 26-week kind of assessment as to how you can parent, and not having those resources that maybe the mother might have been given through these systems, and the importance of giving the same opportunities to dad to be able to take that responsibility over if it needs to. And also the negative views of young dads in systems. So one of the researchers within our group talked about the work done by Mark Osborne around it, and the huge thing from the research that dads said that the worker that went above and beyond all they'd done was just checked in with them, saying how they're done, and mentions of the kind of group kind of came to a conclusion that that shouldn't be the above and beyond, that should be the basic kind of, this is the standard that we go by, rather than it feeling like, oh, the workers went above and beyond just because they asked us how I'm doing. And finally, a whole holistic approach throughout health, law and education around parenting and involving both parents is a key to the support that we offer parents, and ultimately kind of the how fruitful the life of the child will be because of this support. And that's it from our team.
Brilliant, thank you, Adam. Yeah, and that point around relationships and working with mums and dads certainly came out in our group towards the end as well. All right, and then last but not least, can I bring Tom in? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Anna. We heard a pretty shocking reminder of how far back things can be in this field. Somebody did some research into imagery in the in the city of Nottingham in children's centres, and the only images of men in posters were posters about domestic abuse, and there were no men in any other kind of posters. So that's pretty shocking. We considered how getting things farther inclusive really does begin with maternity services and in healthcare. And we touched on some practical things like, for instance, having cards or some sort of information to be given to fathers, specifically designed for them, when there are 12-week scans, for example. But going into even before then, what about when, you know, with pregnancy testing and initial contact with GPs, is even the question asked, is the dad involved? You know, do professionals have the courage to ask the question? And then if the dad is involved, to follow that through with making sure that the information flow is open to the father as well as the mother. So that was one whole area that we discussed. Yeah, if I can just go back to that thing about the posters, the flip side of that is we recognize that sometimes when the home situation has a chaotic element to it for whatever reason, substance abuse, whatever, that just sometimes it might be the father who is actually the protective factor or the potentially protective factor. And agencies need to, you know, recognize that possibility and reach out for it when it's there. We talked quite a bit about the diversity thing. We loved the notion about, you know, when you go fishing, remember there are different ponds to fish in. But to take that a bit further, we recognize that because of the diversity of people's situation, we need to have a wide diversity of support package, as it were, and indeed to always have in mind that we need to tailor the support to the particular circumstances of a family or a young man or whatever. And then lastly, just we did touch on the whole issue of young men and young men being carers, and young families where there is a child with additional needs, and how involving the dad and getting dads who, young men who are carers, to actually talk about their circumstances has the same range of obstacles in the way as what we've touched upon in the more general circumstances. So I hope I've touched on everything our group was involved with. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. And thank you to all of the people who have fed back in the plenaries, and of course to everyone who has contributed in the breakout discussions as well. We just want to reiterate before we close the webinar that we see this very much as the start of a conversation. So we've learned a huge amount from you today, and hopefully you've also managed to gain some useful insights as well from the research and from the project. I'm just going to, conscious of time, we are over. We did debate having a 3-hour webinar, and again, clearly this would have been a good idea. But we have developed some recommendations for practice, so hopefully you can see those on the screen now. I was going to talk through them, but these are available in project reports that you'll be able to access following this webinar. They're currently available on the Following Your Fathers Further project website. So that just gives an overview of some of the key things that really came out for us We actually do have a final request of you all before you do go. Again, seeing this as kind of a constructive space to think about how we drive and transform the current service support environment, particularly family support. We'd like to ask you to write down some pledges for practice that you hope to take away from this event and implement in your own organisations. We've set up a Padlet, which is something we've asked many of you to contribute to before the session as well, and very easy to use, and the instructions are on there for you. If you can click on the YouTube link there or use the QR scan code there, that'll take you to the Padlet space, and we can also share that the Padlet link in the chat as well. If one of the team could do that for me, that'd be fab, and we can post that afterwards as well. Again, this is really important feedback for us, just to understand, you know, how the research has influenced your own thinking. Finally, we do have some project reports. So there is a full page report which looks at some of the academic literature and then also presents the findings that the dads have developed, and also a much briefer recommendations for services page. But I'm going to conclude the webinar with a final list of resources, and just a huge thank you to everyone who's attended today, to everyone who's been involved in this project. This is as I say, my first opportunity to support peer research. It's been a huge success, and that's completely because of the passion and the drive of the dads and lads at the North East Young Dads and Lads project. So a huge thank you once again. So thank you, everybody.